Content warning. This episode discusses child sexual abuse and trafficking.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Teddy Talks, a podcast created by UCL Paediatric Society, where medicine meets mischief and we discuss all things pediatrics from teddies to training pathways. I'm Yamina, one of your co hosts, and I'm currently in my second year of medical school.
And I'm Letitia, your other co host and a fifth year medical student. We're bringing you along with us as we dip our toes into the vast array of subspecialties in pediatrics. If you're a medical student or anyone interested in pediatrics but don't know where to start, just like us, then you're in the right place. So, in the last episode, we were really lucky to have Dr. Ella Rahamim on the show to discuss with her to discuss her life within community pediatrics. And we had a really thoughtful conversation on the future of community pediatrics, and we talked a lot about neurodivergence, neurodevelopment, how to support these children, and as well as talking about the complexities of safeguarding for these children as well.
Yes, but today we have an episode that is bound to be a thought-provoking one. We're honored to welcome Dr. Laura Carolyn Wood, a forensic pediatrician whose work is internationally important. Based in Yorkshire, Dr. Laura is a forensic pediatrician supporting children aged 0 to 17 that have disclosed or have concerns regarding sexual abuse. Beyond her frontline work, Dr. Wood is a passionate advocate for improving how health systems identify and respond to exploitation. Through her work as a director of Vita Network, a clinician led charity who aims to approach human trafficking as a public health issue, Dr. Laura assists an organization that helps train professionals, shape policy, and promote collaboration between clinicians, law enforcement, and social care. In 2024, she was awarded a Churchill Fellowship for her research on child trafficking prevention, exploring how frontline health and justice services can work together to disrupt harm at its roots. So, Dr. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, so we were just wondering if we could start off by if you could tell us a little bit more about what practicing as a forensic pediatrician looks like in practice, from start to finish for each referral that you get. So how much time do you spend with a child, or and do you do a lot of liaison work? How does it look like to you?
Oh, you'd like to know all about it, absolutely, because it's one of these careers which I think is quite rare. I know certainly when I was doing my pediatric training, even when I was sort of heading more into registrar territory, I'd never really heard of forensic pediatrics. I'd never really heard of a sexual assault referral centre, which is where I'm based. And so it is a bit of a mysterious career, and one not a lot of people in the world do, and not a lot of
Mm.
people know about it. So one of the best things from today is just to let you know that we're here to help you if you're a pediatrician or any other type of doctor and you've got concern about sexual abuse. So basically, for me, as a forensic pediatrician, that means that I will be called in to consider about whether full medical would be in the best interest and proportionate for any child where there's a really significant concern, or a child or young person has said, something really difficult has happened to me, and it's something that sounds like it could fall into the category of sexual assault. And so, one of the amazing things about pediatrics, of course, is that the age range within pediatrics is so wide. So caring for a 3-week-old baby is so different from caring for a 16 or 17-year-old who said something really difficult has happened. So within that, there is just such diversity and such spread of what we're doing. So I will try and create sort of an imaginary average child somewhere in the middle to give you an idea of what we do. But then, like any pediatric care, it's really tailored to that young child, to their age and stage and all of these things. So let's say a standard day in the office for me is that I will arrive and perhaps take a phone call from a police officer. And the police officer will say, we've got a little child, she's a girl, and she's 8 years old. And she has said that her uncle has touched her in places that he shouldn't have done. And we're really concerned about her. Would you be able to see her? Now, what I would want to do at that point would be to think about the child's safety, to think about the child's medical needs, and to think forensically. So when we're thinking about the word forensic, it doesn't just mean sort of dead bodies, it means anything to do with crime. So I've got multiple hats on the minute I hear a child's name, the minute I have somebody call up and say, we think you might be the right person to help here. Okay, so I will then be asking that police officer, or perhaps it might be a social worker, so tell me more about this little girl. Is she safe now? Where is she now? Is she with a parent who's safe? Has she had to go into emergency care somewhere? Is she in a hospital? And if she's in a hospital, is she in a hospital because she's been really hurt? Or is she in a hospital because she's in a safe place in the hospital? So trying to understand, is she okay? Then I'll want to know a little bit more about it. And you've just mentioned about the colleague who spoke on your last episode about community paediatrics and neurodivergence. Well, a lot of my work will be looking after children who have other vulnerabilities to harm, and sort of ADHD and autism spectrum are a big part of that. So I'll say, well, what do we know about this little girl? Does she have ADHD? Does she have autism? Does she have any developmental concerns? Has anything else gone on in her life that we know about? And then I'll be wanting to know a bit about the alleged perpetrator as well. So how old is this perpetrator? What background are they from? As the police, do you already know about them, that they've already registered sex offender, that they've already done other wrong things, perhaps drugs or domestic violence, or what do we know about this person? And the reason I'm asking that medically is I'm starting to calculate the risk of possible infection for this child if something wrong has happened to them. What could be the risk of HIV? What could be the risk of chlamydia and gonorrhea? All these sorts of things. And then I'm thinking forensically. So I'm thinking about how can I help police investigate this as a crime? So how do I care for the child, and how do I address the child in the context of a potential crime? So whilst not wanting to be too gory on a podcast, I need to know what body part of the perpetrator has gone where and when. And then that basically is what's going to help me make a forensic strategy for the child, which is using the latest forensic science and understanding of DNA and understanding of how DNA changes and moves off different parts of the body to make a plan of care and a plan of where to do the forensic swabs. They're like cotton buds on the skin to try and get up that invisible DNA that may have been left there by a potential perpetrator. Also to think about injuries both medically, but also as part of understanding a potential crime. Do we know, has this little girl got bumps or bruises or scratches or anything else happened? And then make a plan to care for her, to support the police with their inquiry too. And then on top of all of that, we have to make sure that somebody with parental responsibility knows what's happening and gives consent for this to happen. And that can actually be really tricky if it's a family member who's involved or a parent who might be the alleged perpetrator. So sometimes social care needs to get involved, and who can take this decision to know what's right for the child. So already, even just in planning, I'm thinking about the whole child in the context of their life, and that child in the context of the alleged crime. So once we've done that, if we've got time, and we usually do, we will ask the police or the social care to set up a strategy meeting. So a strategy meeting is something we will all attend as paediatricians as we get more senior at different times, particularly if we get an interest in safeguarding. And it's like a round table of professionals. It's usually online, and we'll have somebody from the police there, perhaps a GP or a health visitor, might be the paediatrician if the child has been, and the concern has been raised in hospital, or the child has had to go to hospital. We might have school there, the school safeguarding person, the head teacher. Perhaps the child was doing drawings at school that made the teachers worried, and they got chatting, and that's where the disclosure came from. And everybody will learn about each other's perspective about this child in the context of their family, and we'll also think about any other children who could be at risk as well at that time and make a plan. And all of us will decide together from the information we know, do we think this child could be at risk of serious harm, or has had serious harm happen to them, in which case we need a full-scale inquiry? Or are there other things that the child is safe and other things need to be done first? And it's that at that point we'll decide, yes, a sexual assault referral centre medical, so a forensic medical or somebody like me, would be really good to offer this child. Okay, and then we'll plan a date and time. If something difficult has happened to the child really recently, and we look at our forensic science and know we've got enough time to see them and the DNA might still be there, we'll call them in really quickly for a forensic medical examination. So that's all the planning that happens before the child even arrives. I don't know if you've got any questions about that bit.
I think that was really interesting. I think in regards to, I mean, we'll come back to safeguarding throughout the session. I think this is more, it kind of links quite nicely into our next question actually. We often talk about how pediatrics is a particularly emotive specialty, and healthcare is already a difficult sector to work in regards to emotional workload. And we've spoken about this in previous episodes as to how for many, this workload is increased in pediatrics. And I can imagine in your particular field of work, it's even more difficult in that sense. So we were wondering, we've obviously spoken about the patient plan, but how do you as a physician create boundaries within this field and tackle that emotional burden of the role as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we might come on to chat about trauma and things like that a little bit later, but one of the core components of being traumatized is feeling powerless. And I use the definition by Betsy Dettieri. And one of the things that's very protective about this work is that I actually have a very particular role, and that role isn't powerless. I have a plan, I have a purpose, and that purpose is for the good of the child. So that is incredibly protective. So it's very different from just hearing horrible stuff and you have no part to play in making it better. There's nothing you can do about it. It just sits in you. You don't have purpose in after hearing that really difficult stuff. That is actually more risky for somebody than somebody who's actively engaged in caring for the child. So that's why a lot of the studies will say actually, perhaps people who work in the legal side or the police who are just reading all these horrible things without necessarily working directly with a child or family, researchers, people forget about us doing our research projects, that research can be much harder on the trauma side of things than actually actively engaging and helping a child. And the other thing as well is that once you have to do a really good amount of training to be able to do this job and you work up to it. It's not something that you hop into straight out of medical school. And that's not just because it's quite heavy in what the content is. Sometimes you see the worst of the world. Sometimes I feel like I'm working quite near the edge of hell with some of the stuff that comes. And there's a really wide spectrum from happy little baby with lovely parents, sore bottom, but everyone's just a bit scared and it just a nappy rash, through to an older child or a 9 or 10-year-old with the most horrendous disclosure and there's image abuse and all sorts of things all on camera and really, really grotty stuff. So it's a whole range. But because I'm involved in actively helping and because I've been trained, I have tools and I have purpose and I have a pattern and I have a flow of what I'm doing. And equally, you learn a lot of people, I think, just thinking in general society, if it's the right time, somebody asks me what I do, and I have various answers depending on the situation and who's asking me the question what I do, from just saying, oh, I work in healthcare, through to sometimes it's right for somebody, it's a good connection for them to actually know what I do. But if a regular person heard that I'm going to see a child who's been raped or sexually assaulted, that gives a big sort of, oh, how do you do that? And a lot of people are almost scared of a child who's been sexually abused. Like, oh my goodness, it's an abused child, and we get frightened of the child. But part of, working in pediatrics, before we even get to safeguarding, we learn not to be frightened of children with cancer. We learn not to be frightened of children who look very different from other children or have really different genetic conditions that would trigger fear in other people. And we learn to accept and care and appreciate all children. And I think that's the thing. Once you're trained and you have experience in this side, that you have no fear in meeting a child who's had something difficult. You welcome them as a whole person. This is you and this is your name. You're not a label of this horrible thing coming to see me. And so one of the things I always want to do is be a warm place of welcome for a child who's been through a difficult thing. And I'm deliberately using my nervous system and understanding of trauma to try and calm the room, calm parents, calm the child, and help them feel really that they've been seen, heard, believed, empowered, that they feel safe, that I can hear things that perhaps other people would find really difficult to hear, and I'm not going to judge them or shame them. No sort of wincing is going to come across my face or anything like that. And actually, you know, you mentioned at the start about how long I'm with a child. I might be with a child up to 4 hours. And actually, over that time, you really build relationship. And the moment you start to build relationship, fear really, really goes away. And fright really, really goes away. And actually, you end up working as a team with that child, whether they're 2 or whether they're 14, and you're working together to help them. So again, that's really, really protective. And I think there are definitely some children where, like I think in any speciality of medicine at all, there's something about that particular life situation that child has experienced that really hits you, that like really hurts you, uh, where you just feel like you run headlong into the worst of a broken world and it kind of stings your soul. Um, or it's a child and their scenario that is just too close to something in your own world that I've learned quite well to know where I end and somebody else begins. But very occasionally you have somebody who sort of blurs across. And what I've learned to do over time is understand how I react to those things and not be scared of my own reaction. So that's again how understanding about fear and understanding about trauma also helps me look after me. So when I was doing uh, community pediatrics, I used to do some of the fostering and adoption clinics, which last about an hour. You get about an hour with the patient. And I always remember being told that these are very sort of Marmite clinics for pediatricians. Like either pediatricians, like it's just too much, it just doesn't vibe with them at all, or you really like it. And for me, I really liked it. I loved that health in a complex life and trying to understand what's medical, what's trauma, what's developmental, what's nutritional, all these sorts of things. And actually, my background is my granddad grew up in a Barnardo's care home, and I have various sort of adoption and so on in my family tree. So it was quite close to me. But some of those cases had some really, really difficult stories. And so I had some trauma responses then that I had to learn what was happening in me. So I remember one particular case where it was just too close to my own family life. I had 2 little girls and a lovely husband. The case was something to do in a family unit which looked quite a lot like ours. And I remember that one gave me a particular fear, and I started imagining things and sort of seeing things happening that weren't happening. And it was echoes of the case that I was imagining could possibly happen in my own home. And it wasn't very pleasant. But because I recognized that, oh, actually, I have heard a really horrible thing, my brain is saying to me, be careful, because this horrible thing really did happen. So be careful, could it happen to you? And that was my brain actually trying to help me. And so I was able to say, rather than, oh my goodness, I'm ill, I have to come off work, there's something wrong with me, I'm broken. I was able to go, oh right, I've got a great brain that's trying to protect me. It's seen something that it knows not right, and it's standing up for me. So it's giving me messages to say, beware of this danger. And so what I just needed to do is to say, okay, I hear you, brain. I hear you. You're trying to look after me. You know that we've heard about something dangerous and you're trying to warn me. I hear you, but my situation is safe. That's not my story. And actually to deal with it that way. Same for, if you have a case that gets into your dreams, again, your brain trying to say something scary happened, watch out, rather than, thrash about and why can't I sleep? I hate that I can't sleep. Something wrong with me, da da da. Okay, brain, I'm listening to you. I've heard you, but we're safe and we're okay. And this is how. So those sorts of things, that understanding trauma is really helpful. And then I do all the other sensible things like eat well. So I've got proper nutrition so I can look after my second brain in my gut. I exercise so I can get all those stress hormones out and move my body. So if I've had a danger response in me, a threat response, I'm not then sat on the sofa and it's all trapped between me and my phone. I'm letting my body move and do what it wants to do. I spend time with other people. I love to be out in nature, which is just natural therapy is just brilliant. So I'm very intentional about looking after myself. But you're never broken or having a problem if somebody touches your soul sometimes. That means you're human.
Mm.
And I would actually say that if you get to a point with whatever you do in work where you've had to become an ice queen or had to really shut down in order to cope, that's you really trying to super protect yourself when you actually do need some time to care for yourself and time to look after yourself because your threat responses are up high, and that's when you can get burnout and all sorts of things, vicarious trauma. For me, it just wouldn't work to care for these children well if I was all iced and disconnected and compartmentalized. I have to be fully present to really connect with children who've had difficult things. But that's also where the joy is and the satisfaction of the work. You see somebody come in really scared and leave tired after their 4 hours, but with their head held high and with a lovely little beauty bag and feeling like they've been seen, heard, and believed. So it's all those sorts of things together, learning about what it means to be human, learning about what humans do after scary things, and how to look after ourselves. It all really helps.
I think that's really insightful, and I think you've highlighted really well just how important it is for all of us as healthcare professionals who may see quite disturbing things on a daily basis. I mean, especially you, as you've described, to reflect on our experiences continuously. And I can imagine how this kind of mindset, like I really admire the kind of mindset that you've kind of adopted here from all of your
Mm.
experiences and your clearly a lot of reflection, and is quite important actually in being able to do the work that you do and to be open enough to bring someone, a child, in under your care. So that was really insightful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. um, so we've talked a lot about how when we think about forensic pediatrics, we're kind of thinking about how do we respond to children um, when they've come in and told us a little bit about something like becoming victims of abuse or, as you said, sexual assault and things like that, and how we can support them after. But I'm aware that within the scope of your work, you have a bigger focus of also focusing on the prevention side of of this thing, of everything. And so we were really wondering if you could share with us a little bit about what you think prevention of child trafficking looks like to you at all the different levels, so at the organizational level or at the
Mm-hmm.
national level and at the global level.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's an enormous question that I think the
Huge
world
question,
is
a
still
really
trying
hard
to
one.
trying to
Try
sort
to answer
out.
as best as you can.
Yeah, but I mean, I think where the interest came in for me is that naturally, as doctors, we tend to go into the aftercare category, or either recognizing
Mm.
child sexual abuse or child trafficking, because my work would cover all, and I see victims of child trafficking after sexual assault because they've been sexually exploited or they've been in the county lines drug gangs or something. There's been sexual violence as part of that. So doctors naturally tend to go to the how do we spot the signs, or aftercare and treatment and patients and things like that. But I just found myself, particularly when I started to see that, my goodness, this girl is 15 and she's already been through the government processes and she's already officially recognized as a victim of modern slavery and human trafficking. And she's now been phoned in by the police again for her fifth medical for being sexually assaulted. And clearly the protection wasn't working. And I think I just got angry as well. It's just like, I would like not to see these children in my clinic because this doesn't happen in the first place. And I just thought, I just don't want these forensic medicals to be needed, because when you work closely with children, and I have up to 4 hours with them, and in that 4 hours, I'm doing a full physical health history, mental health history, looking at self-harm and suicidality, drugs, alcohol, social safety, then full body examination, targeted swabs wherever it's appropriate for them, aftercare, all woven through without, regular chat and chatting about their pets and their favorite dinners and all these sorts of things. And within that time, I would hear a lot of the details of the story of what was happened to them and realize that just so much of it was preventable. And a lot of this type of abuse that unfortunately happens linked to families. But you hear that perpetrators are taking the next step of violence, whether that's psychological or physical, a lot of it's because of contempt for the police, or they think they deserve it, or just because they can. And none of sexual assault and human trafficking and modern slavery is inevitable. Like, it's all a human choosing to violate another human, which means that it is preventable. But looking at prevention is actually quite tricky for research, because how do you research things that never happened because you did something? And it's not where the research money tends to go. It can be quite hard to look at. So actually, if you sort of did a Google for research papers on prevention, most of it's secondary prevention. So you've already been trafficked or abused once. How do we stop the abuse happening again? Not primary prevention, like how do we stop it in the first place? And so I've kind of slid backwards from all the aftercare and the trauma recovery and the HIV care and spotting the signs, and really slid backwards because I was angry about what kept coming through my doors as a doctor to primary prevention. But the world still hasn't fully understood it all. But a lot of it is about baseline vulnerabilities, I would say. So a lot of children who end up in these difficult scenarios, it's because their social protective network has been fractured in some way. So whether that's children who are living through the context of conflict or war or migration, where their usual social safeguardings have fallen apart, or, as we see increasingly in the UK, families are all bubbled and trapped away from each other, and things can happen in secret, and the child doesn't have people protecting around them. And what I would often see is that the more the child might be struggling with somebody exploiting them or grooming them or harming them, the more likely they are to be attending school less, not going to clubs, not going to faith venues, withdrawing from friends, not being registered with GPs, and just they become more and more isolated from safe people who could protect them. And so a lot of what I'm interested in is how do we build healthy and safe communities where people don't just assume it's all the government's responsibility to prevent abuse and trafficking. How do we help people have the courage to speak up and do so in a safe way if there's something that they're worried about, without fear of repercussion? Because it can be actually really scary raising a concern about a child, particularly if it is somebody in your neighbourhood or somebody in the school or college you go to or something like that. How do we help children raise concerns about their friends in a way that's safe for them to do, and they feel heard, seen and believed, and not belittled or minimalised, or it gets laughed off as a teenage joke or whatever it is? So how do we build healthy communities, particularly certainly for the UK, we've had so much budget cuts for anything which would have given activities for children that are safe, and youth groups and all these things have really declined, and there used to be such a place for children to encounter safe adults. With the Churchill Fellowship, which was an amazing opportunity to travel and learn from other nations, that was one of the key things that I came away with. Particularly, I ended up in an amazing coffee shop in Jakarta speaking to a nun in Indonesia who works in the rural communities with victims of human trafficking and young victims of exploitation. And that was one of the things that she felt so strongly about, how much better children were protected in tribal units where there was a tribal leader who kept watch over the group in a health and safe way, and potential perpetrators knew not to step out of line because that would be rejection from their family group, and how a safe small community guarded the children. Whereas if children were just left, somehow the government is meant to be in charge of that, and they were isolated from community, actually that wasn't working very well. The tribal communities were caring for their children far better than those just within the city sprawl under the label of lots of government organizations, but actually without safe community. So that's the sort of thing I'm exploring. So it can almost feel like, well, is that medicine? Is that even health? Is it even medicine? But actually, you mentioned at the start, it's part of the public health approach to trafficking, the public health approach to raising children who can thrive rather than be part of chains of generational trauma and all that that means for sort of suffocating of their opportunities in life, which I feel is really unfair. That makes me angry that other people will take away the opportunity from a child to thrive. That kind of drives me. That really upsets me. So yeah, I would like to see how can we do that that is doable and on the ground. And sometimes that's much more to do with empowering people, giving people power, giving people confidence, rather than we need a shed load of money and we need new gadgets and gizmos and all the rest of it. How do we do that? But then, yeah, I mean, there's so many levels to what you were saying about prevention of trafficking and exploitation and child sexual abuse. But of course, the online world is a massive and rapidly changing thing. And so many of the children I would see in clinic have had their harm connected through Snapchat and TikTok, particularly. I get red flags at anything to do with Snapchat and TikTok. We've got how do we help schools? How do we help hospitals? How do we help any businesses or community organisations that work with children to respond well? What does the government need to do? What do protective organisations need to do? And then you go all the way up to, like, yesterday I had the amazing privilege to be part of a United Nations consultation on this, protections of victims and how to work across the globe between nations. How do we support each other, not only for children who are crossing borders between nations, but also children being exploited within our own countries and learning from each other. So it's an enormous and ongoing thing. I think sadly children have been harmed since the beginning of history as we know it. And each generation, each context has different ways that sort of looks. But certainly we should be able to find better ways to help our children thrive.
Absolutely. It's very interesting that you brought up like global communication. That's literally our next question. But I just wanted to reflect on, I think it's so interesting how you brought up the idea of community and the kind of shift in community, because I had a very similar conversation with with a friend recently about the impact on children with the decline of the community library. And I've got two younger sisters, and there's a bit of a age gap between us. And we were talking about it, and I was saying, like, when I think back to my childhood summers, I was always at the library. I was at drama clubs, or I was doing the summer reading challenge and collecting all the smelly stickers and stuff like that. And I was just comparing that to my sisters. Not to say that they, we were raised the exact same way, but that community element, it's missing. I think especially in the post-COVID era, that's what we're struggling with the most. They are thriving, they're happy, healthy children, but at the same time, there is that kind of that idea of connection and community in that sense as well. So it's a really interesting thing to consider as well there. So, as you've mentioned, you've traveled abroad for your work and your research. Is there anything you've learnt from international methods of tackling sexual abuse that you think could be implemented in the UK? Or what improvements as a whole world would you propose when approaching these issues? And what do you think the main challenges are that means that we haven't addressed these so far?
Wow, I might have to come back to you on some of those when I finish the research project. But I mean, I think what I have seen, one of the main things is that because all this work and like this forensic work is at the intersection of health and justice, you are looking at criminal actions in a lot of these cases, which is why it does need to come under the banner of structures of law and structures of policing and structures that understand that it's a criminal offence and that it affects not only that child, but how criminal activity affects their child, the family, society, economies, nations, so on and so forth. So it does need to have a structure to it. And I think one of the things I see is that if you're looking for care of people who have been exploited or trafficked or have been modern slaves, you need to be really careful as nations who the leader is of that, because at the minute the Home Office is in charge of the identification and support for survivors of human trafficking and severe exploitation in that kind of setup. But they're also in charge of immigration and law enforcement.
Mm.
And, I think a lot of people would argue that they're not the right people to then lead care, because their expertise and interest and focus is on immigration and deportation and law enforcement, and where it's sort of somebody's come from another nation, it's the immigration side of things that flashes their lights more than could somebody have been a victim and need support. And like with any business or organization, the leader changes the whole spirit of what happens in that organization. The leader changes the whole priority structure. And I think for when we're talking about care and compassion and that sort of thing, it would be much better led by people who are experts in safeguarding and safety rather than law enforcement and crime and immigration and deportation.
Yeah.
And that's got lots of reasons to it. It causes survivors a lot of fear as well, if they're international survivors particularly. So globally, let's have the right person leading it to get the outcome that's necessary and sort of separate some of these things. I mean, other big things is that if you're talking globally as well, you're talking about epic amounts of money, amounts of money when you're talking about exploitation and human trafficking. And of course, movement of money changes the economies of states. And this movement of money is, often done in a way that completely bypasses tax and bypasses all these other things. So, drawing states' interest where perhaps they might struggle with the compassionate side, where cold hard cash talks, those sorts of things are important as well, to talk the right sort of language to the right sort of leaders. And I think one approach that I'm really interested to learn more about is particularly led by the International Justice Mission. So they have a real theory of change around when you equip and upskill the justice system and the police force to respond and recognize victims, respond well, really high quality criminal justice systems. That also really, really helps, because a lot of perpetrators, they're quite opportunistic. It's not that they're big, brave, whoever's who will do it regardless. If you push up the risk to the perpetrator, they won't do it. And so I'm really interested in, rather than try and end global poverty and end all child vulnerability in the whole wide world, which of course, if I had a magic wand, I would, but actually we still, after all these decades of trying to end child poverty, which is a big underlying factor for some of these things, we can't. Is there a way that's less resource intensive, that tips the risk for perpetrators, so all the opportunistic ones who have a go because they think they can will stop? And that would actually affect not all exploitation and trafficking, but a really significant chunk of it. When you get to your high level organized criminal gangs, that needs a different approach. But yeah, just thinking about who leads and how that changes the flavor of and priorities of everything that whole organization does. Really high quality criminal justice systems and training frontline professionals. So all those things are really important.
Wow, thank you so much. That sounds like, yeah, it's a really clear description of like all of the different levels that we need to think about in order to make that change. And thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to talk a little bit more about your own experiences as well, about within the work that you do. We were really interested in knowing a little bit more about what are some of the insights or specific stories that have stayed with you throughout your journey researching on child trafficking and or working with vulnerable children in general.
I actually think one of the things that's really inspiring me so much at the minute is that there's a huge growth in the survivor leadership field. over the last couple of years. And the United Nations UNODC just hosted the first ever global forum, which was survivor led, and survivor leaders from all over the world. So these are individuals who have experienced modern slavery and human trafficking, have exited that experience of human trafficking and modern slavery, and have chosen to come back and be survivor leaders in the field. And it's the most amazing group of powerful men and women, some from really humble backgrounds who are now leading in their own communities in other nations, others who are PhD researchers and on the track to be professors, working through their experience now, bringing that back to their field. And I think most recently I had the huge privilege of being invited to that global forum, which was survivor led. And I just remembered being sat in the community that had attended there, and I just thought, if only this child I'd seen last week could see this incredible woman on the stage who has been through what she has been through, and now she's leading and she's continuing to heal and she's shaping policy and she's not taking any nonsense from anyone. And you saw how empowered she was. I wonder if that would help the child I saw last week to believe in herself a bit more, because when you've been abused, you lose your sense of identity. Shame can overtake you. You can feel hopeless. And then if you're a teenager as well, developmentally, you can't see the future very well anyway. But I just thought, I felt so encouraged, because I completely believe people can recover from trauma. But, with the survivor movement, it's not just we've recovered and we're ticking along okay. It's actually, no, we are an empowered body of lived experience experts. And actually, the whole global stage has shifted to now really you should not do research. You should not do anything within this field without the input of survivors with lived experience expertise. And that's been really good, because for so long, and it's still not perfect, it's been, poor little victim, you stay as a victim, we don't want you, just receive our services and we'll help you get better. And all very well meaning, but as soon as you started to have a survivor who started to raise their voice or challenge the status quo, then suddenly, oh, that's not quite the victim I wanted. And so there's been lots of challenge about that. So I think that's staying with me far more than the sad shift, and really demand different levels of attention from national leaderships and bodies as well. And we have amazing survivor leaders in the UK who have written books, who are teaching and speaking, who are not taking any nonsense on a policy or practice level. They're fiery men and women, and yeah, it's amazing to see. And it's always really good to be challenged by people when full well I've been blessed not to have walked through severe exploitation and human trafficking. My learnt expertise is through caring for many people who have, but I've never walked in somebody's shoes. And of course, every survivor's shoes are different anyway. They've all had their own personal and unique stories. So it can be very humbling to hear how important that perspective is from the other side, but also over time, and to learn, well, 5 years ago, I went to the hospital and the doctors didn't notice. And I tried to tell them, and this is how I tried to tell them. I tried to look at them and show them I was frightened. I tried to show them, but they just thought I was the silly teenager and they didn't see me. And then see them now as an amazing survivor leader who's speaking into that space. So that's been incredible. But yeah, very, very, very humbling in a very good way. Knock our little doctor's cap off in a good way. So yeah, I'm excited for the field in that respect.
Yeah, I think that's a really
empowering.
beautiful. Yeah, I think what's so um special about that reflection is that, I mean, even as medical students, we see like how, you know, I mean, we kind of big ourselves up a little bit, we're medical students, there is that pride associated with it. And there is, I mean, obviously it's well earned, but at the end of the day, I think in pediatrics, especially in a world where youth voice is it's improving, but it's definitely something we have yet to work on. I think it's so I think I love this is probably one of my favorite questions to ask doctors, what they've learned from their patients, especially pediatric patients, because there is still so much that we can learn from, from our kids in that sense. And it's just a beautiful one. I love
Yes,
that
yeah.
question. So let me just find so far we've spoken about forensic pediatrics, sorry, in the lens of child trafficking and also sexual abuse. But one of your other many research interests also lay within the impact of policy on children's development, particularly in regards to immigration, child detention, and parent-child separation. And I'm very interested in this, and I think it's very topical at the moment. Could you tell us more about what this research teaches us, especially as we're living in a world where views on immigration are more hostile than ever, with child displacement and separation at high?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just what needs to come back to is people need to remember that children are human, and that children especially, whilst they might be parked as a name and a number on a piece of paper or a computer somewhere going through processing or whatever, they're actually growing and developing all the time, and their growth and development is being shaped by the context of their lives. And what's particularly important is if children are having severe grade fear in the context of their life as they're growing up. Particularly if they're very little, but all the way through that sensitive brain development. And research says that's up to about 26 years of age. Brains are still growing and changing all the time. And again, when it comes to, say, children being detained as part of immigration, that part, the sort of detention bit or the immigration bit, is only part of their wider story. And if you look at the arc of their life, or their sort of thread of the story of their life and what it's teaching them about who they are and their world, almost certainly there were really difficult things beforehand, whether that was, domestic violence or conflict or gang violence or whatever it was. Something will have happened beforehand. These are not just kids going on a holiday. Actually, the research shows us more and more, and I'm sure you're familiar with adverse childhood experiences research. But that goes back into the womb, and then actually even to the generations before, and sort of your epigenetics. So if your genetics are the notes on our genetic piano, epigenetics is sort of the pattern in which they're played. And just that these things which are human imposed on children affect children. And I think often cold, hard policy forgets that. And cold, hard policy particularly forgets that children keep growing, keep changing, keep developing. All that time, they're still stuck on a computer or on a piece of paper. And so that's particularly for children who are in that limbo of asylum, or in that, even worse, separation from parents, or detention or anything like that. You are really setting them up to be at high risk of trauma. And so when I'm thinking about trauma, because it's a word that is just used all over the place at the minute, from not having enough sprinkles on your mocha through to, genocide, and the same word trauma is being used. And even in the medical landscape, trauma can, either people think like broken legs of trauma, or trauma is in somebody's particularly sad, or they think PTSD, or just needing to be extra nice to people. But it's actually a very, very human, very complex set of responses that happens in situations of terror, powerlessness, and overwhelm. So that's the trauma recovery focus model, with Betsy Deteri describing it that way, because there's other descriptions of it which I think are a bit more limited. But in any of these situations, or any child that you see, you can have trauma from very difficult medical experiences, horrible cancer, horrible scary asthma where you're ventilated, all these sorts of things parents we're caring for can experience trauma. I mean, just think of any situation where you felt somebody is feeling helpless, they're feeling powerless, they're feeling really scared, and they're scared that they don't have any ability to get through this and cope. So you feel overwhelmed. And that is like one of the most horrible places for a human to be. So most of the time, if we're scared of something, we feel that we've got something we can do about it to help ourselves. So we're not powerless. So we're not going to be traumatized just because something's scary. Or equally, if somebody feels powerless, but they're not scared at all. So perhaps you're holding a child down that, and giving them a really cute tickle around their neck and they're laughing and laughing. They're powerless, but they're not scared. They're not going to be traumatized. But if you are really, really scared and you feel inside yourself that you've got nothing you can do to help yourself, it's really like the body just gets very overwhelmed and pushes you into all sorts of subconscious responses to that. And children who are sort of man-made, put into these circumstances where they're at risk of trauma, I feel that there's a responsibility in that, what we're doing to children when we know that it is harmful to them, and not even just, oh, we've given them a bad day and a bit stressful day and a bit of a grumpy day, but actually this man-made scenario could give them long-term harm, because they're also the children who perhaps are least able to access safe community and support and additional healthcare if needed afterwards, should they need it. And I think it's that kind of man-made harm that is particularly problematic and that needs to be looked at. Not that long ago in history, children were just belongings of parents. They weren't really thought about, they weren't really considered fully human. But now in our modern understanding of a child, with children having human rights, we need to see these sorts of things differently. They're not too small to remember. They won't just forget about it. If you've completely ripped apart a child's ability to sense safety in their own body and mind, and you have forced them into survival mode rather than being able to thrive, then there will be consequences for that. And people need to work through that and then go on to parent and go through and all these things. And it just adds challenges to people that we didn't necessarily need to be there. So those are the sorts of things that, again, could be thought about before to be prevented, rather than always the outcry afterwards that a child's human rights are being abused or what have you. How to get in there before that so that we're not firefighting afterwards.
Yeah, I think it's really important to kind of remember that children are in this very critical period of their lives, that they're still developing, and when these man-made situations that you just described happen to them in this very critical period of their lives, it could really have a long-term consequence on them, and that's what kind of shapes who they will kind of become as adults as well. And it's really important to be able to support them through this time in order to kind of prevent all of that from happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's never to say somebody who's had a very traumatic experience is doomed or stuck or is going to have a terrible life. But it's a case of looking at risks. And actually, if you think about global leaders who have changed the entire world, a lot of them have had horrendous experiences, but have come through it to be the most incredible world leaders and incredible spokespeople who never want another soul to suffer the way they have suffered. So it's never about, this experience equals bad life, but we don't want to play with risks and put people in situations that they unnecessarily then have to really take time to recover through. But then, of course, we know the other side of it is that these particular things we're talking about, immigration and detention, you even got a risk to life as well. So you've got the whole spectrum. And again, helping bring a proper understanding of trauma, not just the child's a bit sad because this difficult thing happened, but how to your people, your economy, all these things going forward is important.
Yeah, and actually that links really well with the next question. You were talking a lot about trauma and our understanding of trauma, and we are very aware that you advocate for trauma-informed care within our healthcare system and training other healthcare professionals to practice this way as well. So, would you be able to explain to us a little bit more about what trauma-informed care means to you and how we as medical students and doctors should practice this when we see our patients?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I kind of really see it as like human informed care, because actually many of us have been through different traumas. It's actually hard not to go through life without having been through something. Some, perhaps yourself, perhaps your colleagues have been through some very difficult things in the past, or going through really difficult things at the minute. And I think by the very nature somebody is in a hospital, it's really hard for them not to be scared. I my anxiety goes up if I have to be a patient, and I think that's probably because I feel powerless, because I'm meant to be the one walking around with a stethoscope, not sat there, in my little gown, feeling all feeble. But I mean, those little moments remind us of what it feels like um to be a patient rather than the person with the sort of power in the hospital, so to speak. And I think being trauma informed is just understand, what do human beings do when they're feeling really scared, feeling like they're powerless or helpless, and they're feeling really overwhelmed. Because what I don't want to happen is that we're not trauma informed. When we get information to say somebody's traumatized, then we start trauma informed care. Like it's, once we've diagnosed the cough, then we start treatment X. It's a case of, okay, let's understand humanity and what humans do, because anyone I might meet or interact with might be going through really difficult things. So, I mean, trauma informed care has got lots of different elements to it. What it's not is put a pretty bunch of flowers on the receptionist desk and just be nice and smiley to everyone. That's not trauma informed care. That's just being nice. Trauma informed care is using the neuroscience and the whole body biology, biochemistry science of understanding humans in the context of trauma, and applying it to interpret and respond to the people that you're caring for. So that would involve understanding how to recognize potential trauma and what that might look like. And it's so much more than somebody weeping and crying and looking sort of stereotypically traumatized. That might be somebody who's quite dissociated and quite numb, quite zoned out, somebody who's not feeling pain. It might be somebody who's angry and swearing at you because that's their defense mechanisms kicking in as if you're the enemy, all those sorts of things. And thinking about what might that look like at different ages, or what might that look like in my patient who have autism, what might that look like in my patient with developmental delay in a wheelchair, and how could I understand the range of expressions of terror and powerlessness and overwhelm that a person might have. Then it's about, well, how do we respond well? How do we respond to help somebody feel safer in their body? And it's also understanding that if somebody's had a really difficult life, perhaps you're caring for somebody who's experienced grinding poverty for the last 10 years, and now things are going really wrong, and there's gang violence around where they are and all these sorts of things. You have to remember as well that me being nice and smiley for 5 minutes is not going to make them trust me and thanks doctor, come and save me, let me tell you everything. So it's about not taking it all personally as well. Somebody who's experienced a lot of difficulty very logically and appropriately should not trust me, and not taking it personally. But how can I work with somebody to help them feel safe? What would make them feel safe? Whether that might be something to do with the door or the curtain or where I stand or how I speak, or, little things I used to do all the time when I learnt about Betsy Detiri's model about terror and powerlessness and overwhelm. Little things like when I was doing a blood test on a little kid. It's scary for them, isn't it? If they just have to sit there and you're just doing things to them. But the minute you give them a job to be in charge of the cotton wool or be in charge of the plaster, they're not powerless anymore. They're then doing that blood test with you. And so it's much less frightening for them because they have power. Or you say, you tell me, you count to 3 and then I'll do it, or whatever it is. Give them some power back so they're not feeling helpless and done to. So there's little drops like that can go into your day that can make a child feel like I'm part of this. I'm not just helpless lying here where an adult does something that's scary to me that I don't understand. So all these things are good. I always think about, if I recognize somebody has really particular needs and they might need mental health support or they might need some trauma therapy, making sure I refer onwards so they don't feel like something really big and important to them has been recognized and then they're stuck. So learning about what might be available in my area for my patient. How do I refer to CAMHS? When do I refer to CAMHS? Are there options apart from CAMHS? Because CAMHS isn't necessarily the right place for everybody. So, for example, there's a Childhood Trauma Recovery Network, CTRN, where you can go and see therapists near you who might work with childhood trauma. Those sorts of things are available. There might be charities, Young Minds, NSPC. There might be all different options. So look about what might suit the age and stage of your child patient. And their parents, if it's something that's affected the whole family, you know, a house fire, a car crash, whatever it might be, what sort of help might they need? And then what you're trying to do is resist re-traumatizing somebody. So you don't want to be yet another person for them to have to survive. So you're trying to be the opposite of somebody who's exploited them. So giving them back power, giving them back dignity, listening to somebody, not judging, not shaming. If they say they don't want something, honor that, you know, that sort of thing. You're trying to work with somebody. So that all involves concepts of trustworthiness and transparency, all these sorts of things that actually would make a really good doctor. But it's you're taking it above and beyond just being nice to a patient. You're actually putting neuroscience theory to applied use. And that makes it very interesting and very satisfying. And for me, the more I've done that and the more I've practiced that, the more I can see and put language to behavior in the children I'm caring for that I would have just wouldn't have had language for before. It's like, oh, they're doing that's a bit odd. And now I can say, I think she's dissociative. Something must have really scared her there. She's not able to stay present. And this is what's happened. So this is dissociation. So I'm able to put language to what's happening. Oh, that's interesting. She's suddenly playing like a toddler, even though she's 10. What has just happened? What might have triggered her to trip into that? So I'm not by any means an expert. I would say I would have an interest in childhood trauma, special interest in childhood trauma. I don't call myself an expert. I'm not a psychotherapist. I'm not doing therapy with anybody. But it's a bit like, you know, when you're at medical school and you learn about funny walks. Do you, every time you see somebody on the street with a funny walk, are you behind them going, is it the hip? Is it the knee? Is it the ankle? Every doctor I know does that. It's like, this is sort of check that out. But it's being curious about human bodies and the pattern of what you've taught about human bodies do in response to certain areas of pain or challenge to a ligament or challenge to a bone or challenge to a different part of the brain, you know. And when you learn about trauma, you learn about what humans do in response to terror and powerlessness and overwhelm. You also learn how human it is. And so you also learn how to understand and care better for yourself too. So that's where it's been really, really interesting. So I would going to do a book shout out if that's okay. So these are two books that I would recommend for any pediatrician or budding pediatrician or any human actually. First one is probably back to front for you, but it's The Simple Guide to Child Trauma, What It Is and How to Help by Betsy Dettieri. So it's really thin. It's very readable. It's also great for foster carers, adoptive parents, families who have been through a lot. So it's simple to read, but not simplistic. So it obviously has some challenging topics, but it's all about, let me help you understand what's happening, because when you understand something, that gives you back power. And it takes you out of the fear that I'm broken and I'm a weirdo, I'm the only one. And it's really helped me have language, particularly when I was doing the foster care clinics and what I do now as forensics. A lot of children who have experienced trauma think they're broken and weird and the only one and that something's wrong with them. And that's a horrible thing to feel. And so actually to have the language to say, no, you're not broken or weird at all. That's incredible that your brain is doing that to look after you. Your brain is doing that, and this is why it's trying to stand up for you. Your anger that comes is because your boundaries have been broken down. Of course, you would feel angry, and that will come up from deep inside you. That's your body trying to protect you, and this is how we can help. So it can be good for empowering patients. And then this is the next one, The Simple Guide to Complex Trauma and Dissociation. So this is particularly good for sort of one-off life traumas. The minute you have a child who's experienced multi-format abuse or in utero domestic violence, unwanted pregnancy, abuse, certainly all the way up to exploitation, trafficking, paedophile gangs, all that sort of stuff, you're into your complex trauma territory. Again, slightly bigger, but it just helps you understand humanity really. And this applies to adults as well, but it's particularly focused for children, and it tells you what you can do to help. So I would say that those books would do you well far more than any online training module I have ever found to date on trauma, particularly for paediatricians and for paediatricians who are also helping parents and carers and loved ones navigate difficult times as well.
Mm. I think that's, again, another really interesting one. I think what really, the next question ties into that. So, I mean, I think this is going to be a bit of a difficult question to answer because an emphasis that's come up quite a bit in this episode is how varied and how different every child's experience of trauma will be, because everyone has, has their own kind of story, and we can't necessarily always generalize them. But considering the vulnerability of these children, it can get really difficult for us to even identify the children that may need our help because of masking or not feeling able to speak out, or sometimes them not even realizing what an adult is doing to them. So it's a tricky question, but what kind of signs should we be looking out for in children who may need that extra support?
Yeah, absolutely. So some I am always come back to the child is living and growing in a context. So there's look out for contextual markers. So, and I know sometimes this can sound very stereotypical, but it is that some of these things do link to it. But it's never about every family in this circumstance means that there's abuse. Never ever. It can just mean let's just think about what's happening in this family. So we, like I said, we know full well that abuse can happen in the fanciest, wealthiest homes with the best presented parents with the highest, fanciest careers. We know all that. But there are some things contextually that can help make you think, I wonder if this child might need a bit more support. So for me, forensically, that's where that strategy meeting comes in, to hear all those perspectives. So, children who are increasingly dropping out of school or struggling with school. Children where school is saying that there's a lot of behaviour changing in how they're dressing, changing in how they're smelling. So one child I had who was being abused started going to school and the teachers realised she smelled very strongly of urine. And one of the things we can see happen is that if a child is being abused, that self-neglect can come in, and sometimes it's because they're feeling very sad about themselves. But it might also be as I want to make myself as yucky as possible to keep people away and keep that bad person away. And so changes in how a child's appearance is not just I've got a new fancy jacket and a new fancy phone that a dodgy person's given me. It could also be less self-care and neglect. So sort of changes, changes in emotion. So a child who's more angry or more withdrawn and subdued and sad. Children often process through what they draw and how they play. So children who are doing unusual things with their toys or drawing things that seem angry or upset or are to do with genitals, or pushing a certain family member to the edge of the painting and they're covered in red, or whatever it is, they're trying to communicate through art and craft and play or changes to play. Children can reenact what's happened to them on other children, and they can sometimes be blamed that they're the perpetrator and that there's something wrong with them, rather than recognizing that it probably indicates they've been a victim of something. And increasingly in today's world, that can include being made to watch things the child shouldn't be watching at that age. That exposure to porn and stuff like that is just horrific for developing minds. And, it's so prevalent amongst teenagers as well. And it's just so damaging for minds and how teenagers treat each other. And, in the forensic space as well, the other crimes we assess for is non-fatal strangulation. And because it has lots of medical sequelae if you've been strangled. And that's just on the increase with teenagers because of porn, and so problematic. So we're just seeing increased violence. So a child with bruises, a child who's just unusual things happening with their boyfriend, the nature of the messages, how late they are up at night on their phone, classic ones going missing, all these sorts of things we see happening. And then parents who, a lot of the times children I see, there's generational trauma. So the mum or the dad has also had a very difficult past experience, or the mum or dad has grown up in care and has had a lot of life challenges, and it's never ever to say somebody who's grown up in care will be a bad parent. Not at all. Like I said, I've got a lot of people who've experienced that in my own family, and just wonderful. But it can mean that somebody's had a really difficult time and perhaps be more isolated from protective social networks, or have been unsupported themselves, or not had the trauma recovery support that they would benefit from. And now perhaps the child is 2 and very hyperactive and very, very stressful, and there's not much support, and perhaps things are happening that they never wanted to happen, but the stress levels have got so high in the family unit that coping mechanisms failed. So there can be all sorts of things. Harm can happen for malicious reasons and because coping mechanisms failed as well. So or people just couldn't show up as the parent they want to be or carer they wanted to be. So there's a whole range. But is there anything about the family unit or the context of that child's locality that raises concerns about safety? And then is there anything about what other adults are telling you or other family members are telling you about changes in that child's behavior? And then the child themselves. So it would be all the traditional things you would learn in your child protection. But just being mindful that, like you mentioned the word masking, a child won't automatically trust us, and it's completely logical and understandable that they wouldn't trust us. We're this random adult who's come in wearing some stupid clothes, wanting them to take their clothes off, or has strange things around our neck, and they're not going to go, doctor, save me, this has happened, I completely trust you. That would be, the child who comes running over and wants to hug and kiss you and sit on your knee. That worries me because I'm a stranger to you. So it's about understanding that and respecting that, and just sort of developing trust. And if you've got a child who you realize, this child is really, really scared of me, and their body language is held back, or they've become very angry and aggressive to protect themselves to me, what am I possibly triggering for them? Why does the child need to defend themselves so much from me? I just wonder. And sometimes it's essentially about vibes, and vibes, while it sounds waffly, actually, particularly with experience, and that includes just general life experience, it is just lots of pattern recognition going on. So as human beings, we've got nerves and senses in our skin, in our smell, in our hearing, in our eyes, and we are picking up little messages from the whole world around us across all those senses all the time. And those vibes, particularly those that make us feel uneasy or frightened, that's our brain putting together all those little sensory inputs and pattern recognizing that something is not okay. So for me, vibes are really important. Would I make a criminal case on them? Absolutely not. But would it help me be curious? Yes. And so that's that trusting your instinct and your gut instinct, knowing it might not always be right, knowing that your gut instinct might be shaped by your own fears and own life experiences, or the wrong time of the month that you haven't eaten. But, just learning to trust yourself a little bit more and always be curious. And sadly, I would say, you can never rule it out that a child's been harmed. So I think where it's quite dangerous if you just see, sweet little blue-eyed blonde girl and mummy and daddy are solicitors. Oh, just couldn't happen, could never happen, and you just dismiss it. That's more dangerous than just saying, open and curious. Sadly, in this broken world, anything's a possibility. I'm not going to go around weird about it like there's a perpetrator around every corner, but I'm going to be mindful that the world is a difficult place. Adults are very, very stressed at the minute in this current global economy and everything else going on, and things can happen. So just stay curious without being weird, and yeah, just allow yourself over time to, which is what you do as you're training to be a pediatrician, training to be a doctor, spend time with different people and just learn about what it's like to be a person who's not yourself, and how other people respond to different situations. And that just grows your pattern recognition and grows your gut instincts and strengthens it with a little bit more experience, I'd say.
Thank you so much. I feel like, reflecting back on the week that I've had, I've been on the pediatrics ward actually, and it kind of surprised me how actually quite common it is for some of these children to have safeguarding concerns. And you're so right that we should always be having that at the back of our minds, because with these children, it's also very possible that they may not be able to advocate for themselves, and it's kind of like being that person that they can approach to to kind of support them through this time.
Yeah. And sometimes you have to advocate the other way. I mean, to be honest with you, definitely a fair number of occasions, there's been real concerns that there has been racism influencing some of the decisions. So some of the times you have to really address the elephant in the room, that if this child had a different name and ethnicity label, would we be having this discussion right now? So sometimes you have to be brave and advocate the other way. And sometimes people are really clocked into really unhelpful biases. And we all have biases. It's part of how our brain plans and understands the world. But some of those can be really unhealthy and even dangerous when it comes to safeguarding. And I have seen a few times where the safeguarding train has gone 100 miles an hour in one direction, and it actually just like stop, because if this child had a different name and ethnicity, would we be going 100 miles an hour in that direction? No, we would not. Just stop. And so sometimes you have to be brave and advocate the other way as well, and just help the team check their biases, because everyone means well, everyone's trying to do their best, but you have to help each other check each other's biases. And that bias might also be perhaps you missed something before and you got really scared that it would happen again, and so you're hypersensitive to something that sounds a bit similar the next time you encounter it, all those sorts of things. So yeah, the checking of the biases is also really important.
Kind of just highlights how important self-reflection is with this kind of like very sensitive kind of work.
Yeah, and it's not navel gazing. It's helping. It is learning and making sense of things. And because you are dealing with complexity, so if you don't think about it, you're just going to be really blockheaded. So
Yeah.
So true. Now we've talked a lot about the work that you do, which is clearly very important work to be doing, very complex work as well. And it's all about advocating for children, but also supporting them and also trying to give back that power to them, especially even in something as small as conversations with them, giving back that power to them, which was I found really interesting that you mentioned. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners who are logging on here right now are kind of hooked and interested in getting involved with this kind of work. So we were wondering if you could share any advice that you would give to medical students or new doctors interested in working at the intersection of medicine, law, and child protection. And are there
yeah.
any opportunities that you're aware of that might interest our listeners?
Yes, there are. So I think, like I said, I never really even knew about forensic pediatrics when I was starting out. I can't remember if I told you before, but when I was at medical school, I didn't even want to be a pediatrician, let alone a forensic pediatrician. I fell in love with it by accident. So yes, I did a swap in FY2 with some guy. Sent this email around all the FY2 begging somebody to swap with him because he desperately didn't want to do pediatrics. And so I thought, well, I'm not sure if I want to do A&E in central London, thanks. So all right, I'll do pediatrics. That would be really helpful for when I'm a GP. And yeah, ended up really, really loving it. And that's where that came in. I think with the forensic side, that there's all sorts of ways you can either kind of sort of fall into it. Although, what was it somebody else said to me the other day? They said, I don't think you find that speciality. I think that speciality finds you. I thought that was quite interesting. But if I look back over my life, my interest has always been caring for people in complex lives, and health and justice has been themes that have always interested me. So if you're perhaps that way inclined and you love work at the intersection of poverty and health, of justice and health, of marginalized persons and health, of injustice and inequity and social determinants of health and all that sort of thing, then actually you can end up in forensic work from a wide variety of backgrounds, as long as you sort of have a passionate for that kind of intersection. So you can go through pediatrics. I did some community pediatrics. I didn't go all the way up to being a consultant. I have what's called a portfolio career. I came out at registrar level and did research and the forensic pediatric work, and I do research and advisory and consultancy stuff and bits and bobs like that. I like to keep a little mixed bag of things that I do. So you can go through the pediatric route, but anything where you're learning about developmental stuff is really, really helpful. I had actually done quite a lot of neonatal intensive care, which was less helpful for the sort of medical practicalities of it, but it meant I'd had a lot of practice caring for really distressed parents. And I remember just one mum in particular, she had the most beautiful twins, and sadly one of them had passed, and the other one was having a very serious operation at a very, very low birth weight, and just sat with her where she was crying and feeling powerless and feeling terrified and feeling overwhelmed, and just supporting her whilst staying fully present and not going cold and checking out from that. And so that kind of taught me how to, it just gave me practice at holding other people's big emotions, I would say, and holding space for people without needing to fix it straight away. Because I couldn't fix that her little baby was in an operation. Couldn't save the day, couldn't fix it. I could only be there, and being there helped. I didn't need to do anything clever apart from be there and hold space and let her express what she needed to express. And so neonates was very good for that. And then, yeah, if you want to go forward, it would be good to actually get more senior, because most forensic units don't allow shadowing outside of the people who've been through the official process to be staff, because it's crime, because of the nature of it, because who wants 10 people standing around while you're having a medical for sexual assault? You're like, no, thank you. So it can be quite hard to shadow in. But you could start by attending safeguarding clinics, so the non-recent clinics for possible sexual assault. That would be a good place to start. They do often allow shadowing, as long as you've spoken to the consultant and gone to have a chat with them, or the foster and adoption medicals. That's also a really good place to start to learn about whole child care in the context of complexity. That's a really good way to do it. You can also come and join things led by the Faculty of Forensic and Legal Medicine, the FFLM, and you can do those exams later on if you want as well. If you want to learn about human trafficking and trauma-informed consultation skills, you can come and see my team over at Vita Foundation. So that's a clinician-led team, and we look at equipping healthcare professionals and systems and services to respond skillfully to human trafficking and exploitation. And so that's www.vitafoundation.org, or just Google Vita Foundation. So there's lots of training done for medical students across London, particularly. But that can be really good. We've got the most amazing actors that come in, adult actors, but it's all, you can apply it in all directions. And they won't let you be the doctor that just saves the day and is the hero. They won't let you be the hero. It's very, very realistic, which is great. You can also check out Trauma Recovery Global, which is led by Betsy Tadiri, whose model I use, the trauma recovery focus model. So that would be either just Google Trauma Recovery Global, or was it www.traumarecoveryglobal.com. That would be a great place for the resources. You can get the books there. There's training that you can do there, which would help you build up your CV towards this type of work. And also that anyone can go and spy on courts, criminal courts that are happening nearby. You can go and see what happens. You may have colleagues or registrars or consultants who are going to court for some kind of legal thing. Doesn't mean they've done something wrong. It just means that they're there to assist the jury. But they might let you go along and see how they'll be nervous, but see how they handle the court setting and how to support the jury. One of the interesting things is forensics, because it's at that intersection of health and justice, is that I'm both a doctor there to support that child, but I'm also a neutral observer of fact and information to support the jury. So in the criminal sense, I'm not on the child's side. I am a neutral, skilled observer to bear witness to what I see in the child. However, I obviously need to care for the child well to get the best facts to give my neutral opinion to support the jury in court. So it's a really, really interesting way to sort of do things. And then you need to be able to sort of learn to communicate well. So if you're somebody who is good at writing and is good at making sense of complexity or making sense of different facts and being able to put it onto paper so that other people can understand it, lay people can understand it. I think the average reading in the UK is around 9 to 10 years old. So you have to write your forensic medical findings at the level that a 9 to 10-year-old reading capacity can understand. So it doesn't mean people are silly or anything like that, but it's not about how to sound as fancy and clever and, complicated as possible. It's about, I found something that I think is important and I really want to communicate it well so it can be useful. I'm not there to decide if what's true or not true about what's happened to this young person. I'm going to equip you through my skill set for the courts to do so, as well as going the other route and equipping the child for what they need for their health and medical care and everything with my doctor hat on. So yeah, if you're a communicator, if you like being a bit of a detective, if you like justice and supporting criminal justice, if you like helping people recover after difficult things, it's good for you. And I'd say it's quite an interesting space if you are a practitioner who is on the autistic spectrum, or you are very good at meticulous detail and fine focus and things like that. This can be a very enjoyable space if you have those heightened focus abilities and skill sets as well.
Okay, so we're at our final question of the episode. I thought it'd be great. You've just mentioned a bit about what the Vita Network does, but we were wondering if you could just tell us a little bit more about this charity, its aims, and the work they do towards this goal of prevention of child trafficking.
Yeah, so Vita Foundation was actually set up as a medical students project. So my colleague Rosie Riley was a medical student down in Bristol, and she had, I'm sure, do you guys have medical student projects as well? Yeah, so she had her med student project, I think it was fourth year maybe. And there's a charity in Bristol called Unseen that works with human trafficking victims and runs the national helpline hotline. And so she got involved and did a project learning about it, and then she got to present it as you do with the fourth year project, and she presented it to, I think, the GPs that she was on placement with at the time, and it went down a treat. And from that she ended up developing teaching, because other GP practices were saying, come and teach us, we don't know about it, come and teach us. And so it sort of moved around locally, and then she got one of the NH business training years, the name's gone out of my head, NHS entrepreneurship years, and developed Vita training from her medical school project. And now it's been going, gosh, must be coming up to about 10 years. So a lot of the big medical schools in London will come and have the training team come down and train most, if not all, of their FY1s and FY2s over a course of a couple of hours, all about trafficking and exploitation, the trauma-informed consultation skills, practicing different scenarios with actors, learning about the different types of harm, learning what to do as a doctor, learning exactly what to say. Because, sometimes people just say, well, just ask for help. And you're just like, well, what do you mean? Do I scream help? Do I press a button? Do I ring the police? What do I do? So it's a case of, what do you actually say? What comes out of your mouth in these times? How to get concerning second person out of the room without raising any alarm. Again, very helpful for potential domestic abuse situations, other things like that. So it's really practical skills to do that. And then the Vita Network is people from all across the UK who have an interest, or their work crosses over with human trafficking in some way. We've got survivor leaders and public health people, doctors, nurses, social workers, all who sort of have a passion for this area. And initially it was created because so many of us were working just really lonely in a silo and didn't know anyone else doing what we were doing. Like, we were a little lone voice in our little area saying this matters and understand. And so it was an amazing place to sort of club together. And I think now the world has moved on and there's much more connection and much more links between people. So just growing a lot more in teaching and speaking, and we advise on research projects and all these sorts of things. But the key thing, I think, for whatever anyone's special interest is that learn to lead yourself. And that doesn't mean being arrogant. It means that comes the opposite. Just be really humble. But if you have a passion, be humble enough to sit in feeling really ignorant and really stupid as you learn something new that you care about. So for us, we didn't have any teaching on human trafficking and exploitation, and only kind of standard stuff on sexual exploitation and stuff like that. But we cared about it. And so we went along as the only doctors in these big rooms, didn't understand any of the jargon, the lingo, who the important people were, why people were saying what was happening. Just had to sit in that space feeling so ignorant and not having anything to say. And really, people only really thought doctors had a role in treating an injury or TB or something like that, medicines. And just over time found our own voice in what could a doctor or a health professional add into this space. more broadly, and then that the world's moved forward into this public health approach, which is not about who's got what disease moving around. It's about a whole sector response to serious health issues and serious crime. So yeah, don't be afraid. Don't wait for somebody else to ask you. So whatever your passion is, don't wait to be asked. Go and be there. Be there not being the genius or the expert. Sit with how uncomfortable that is. Humbly learn from people, and especially people who are not doctors, who can give you different life perspectives, and slowly gather up the voice and slowly learn how to be a complementary voice to other multi-professionals, not to be the boss, not to take over because you're the great doctor and all that sort of stuff. How can I give another angle that assists other people around me? And so that's been a really interesting journey. So none of my jobs have come either from an advertisement or somebody inviting me. Pretty much everything has come through exploring and being present. And I'm not a forensic paediatrician in the sort of anti-trafficking space, and increasingly having the amazing opportunity to speak more internationally because I'm the best forensic paediatrician in the world. But it's because I've made myself available to that space and taken the time to steadily grow, and just know I'm always learning. So whatever you're passionate about, be present, be available. Don't try and be the person who knows it all, and see how you can support other colleagues. And it just means that your career can develop in a really personalized and really interesting way that you are in control of, and you can build on your passions. And it can be really outside the box. Maybe it's mountaintop pediatrics, I don't know. I find it really interesting reading about marine science and the link between marine science and human health and all sorts of things. Yeah, just think outside the box and don't be afraid to be your own unique person as you grow as a pediatrician.
A beautiful way to end our episode. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for this episode, but it was such a thought-provoking conversation. So, huge thanks again to Dr. Laura for sharing your insight, experience, and passion for supporting young people.
Seriously, so many takeaways. Thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Oh, I loved speaking with you and meeting you. Thank you so much. You've encouraged me so much as well. And I'm so excited for you and all the listeners about how you're just going to blossom and change the world for good. So go for it.
Yeah,
Hope
absolutely.
so.
Yeah, fingers crossed. But if you're a medical student who is interested in forensic pediatrics, we hope this episode gave you some food for thought, and we would love to hear your thoughts via Spotify or Instagram. If you liked what you heard, make sure you're following at teddytalks.peds on Instagram for updates on when episodes will be released. Rate this episode on Spotify and share.
Thanks for listening to Teddy Talks, and see you next time.